All right. So, are you ready? Maybe? You think so? Possibly? Okay. So today, I will go ahead and just let you know, the quiz, I will say this, it should be a very easy 60, a very challenging 100, okay? So there are probably 6 questions that everyone should get because it's just simple dividing and adding, okay? If you looked at the content and you looked at the calculations, most of them very, very, very straightforward, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the more challenging stuff first, okay? And then that way we can kind of go back to the easier stuff a little bit later. All right, so one of the things that this chapter is really supposed to be about, or as one of the things, the thing it's supposed to be about, is development feasibility. And specifically, kind of more the financial feasibility of a development project. So what I've done, and I've used this in pretty much almost every class I teach, is the kind of the simple financial feasibility analysis model. So those of you that have had me before, you probably have seen this, okay? And you should be very comfortable with this by the time that we sort of go through it today, if you're not already. What this does is it allows you to look at a project from 2 different perspectives, okay? One is what is called, and by the way, it's the same thing on both sides, so just in case you were wondering, this is basically, we're going to use one kind of for scratch paper, and use another one for another problem. But the top is called the front door approach, okay? And this is where you sort of start out with, if you know what your land costs are, you know what your construction costs are, and then you can pretty much have a pretty good idea of what your cost of borrowing is going to be, what your occupancy is going to be, then you work toward figuring out what is the minimum rent that I can charge on a property in order for it to be financially successful. Does that make sense? Okay, so in very simple terms, if this model were to tell you you need $10 per square foot in order for the project to be successful, okay, the model is telling you that you need $10 per square foot for the project to be successful, but yet what you're finding in the market is that market rental rates, let's say, are at $15 a square foot. What is that telling you?
Somebody's lowballing someone.
I'm sorry?
Maybe the person don't know what they're doing, or maybe there's a lowball somewhere.
Okay. Kenny, what were you?
Well, if you require 10 and you can get 15, it's a good price.
It's a no-brainer. It's a done deal. I mean, because if your model is basically saying you only need $10 for this project to be successful, but yet the market is actually yielding $15 a square foot, then that's basically saying you should definitely move forward. Okay.
When we're saying that it's successful, are we having like, okay, this is the rate that we want to get back? Or?
Well, we're saying this is what it needs in order to meet our base requirements.
Okay.
Okay? And based upon the inputs that we put into the model. All right? Now we can make this much more complex than what this model is sort of set up to do, and to take into consideration many other, sort of things in terms of a threshold rate of return and so forth. But this model is really looking at it purely from kind of what is the financial deal that you can obtain from your lender, what sort of, once again, market occupancy there is, and then ultimately what you would need to achieve, at an absolute minimum in order for the project to move forward. So it's kind of like, in one sense, it's sort of saying this is, if you're being realistic about all the assumptions that you put into this model, then this is sort of saying this is the worst case scenario with what you can really accept legitimately as a rental rate. And so whatever rental rate that you end up with here should be, for the most part, kind of the floor, if you're being accurate and reasonable and rational with your assumptions. Okay, make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so on the flip side, if the market rents are showing to be, let's say, $7 a square foot, and you need to get $10 a square foot, then the reverse is true, not really a feasible project. Okay, make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the front door approach. The back door approach is kind of just the opposite. Here, you sort of say, okay, I know what I can get as a market rent for a project, and what you do is then you work backwards to basically figure out how much you could pay for construction, how much you could pay for the land, okay, for the project. So it's just two different ways of sort of flipping kind of the same sort of analysis. It's just that one, you're sort of starting with the rents, one, you're starting with the cost of the construction and the land, and you're working toward a rent. The other, you're starting with the rent and working toward how much you could spend on land and on construction. Okay, make sense? Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so first of all, with this, all the math, for the most part, is over here on the left-hand side. You can see plus, minus, divided by, and so forth, equal, all right? Also, all of the green cells are input cells, okay? Those are the ones that you're actually gonna just pretty much just put a number in there that's gonna be a given number, or that you're gonna have to find in the sense of your own market research and investigation and due diligence. The white cells are the ones that you're actually gonna have to perform some sort of calculation, okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna start out with coming up with our own example and working through and seeing what we can get, all right? So let's just start off up here with our site acquisition cost. All right, and so give me a dollar amount for the land.
5 million.
Okay, 5 million. Okay, nice big parcel of land. Okay, good.
I have a question.
Yep.
Let's say a site acquisition. Let's say there's an old building. Would you take into account the tear down and demolition collection into the site acquisition and overall
Yes. That's why we sort of call it the site acquisition cost, is to be kind of all inclusive of what do you need to do to make that land ready for something to be built on it. Or if it already has something built on it, then that would be just part of, like for example, let's say that you buy a property, already has a building on it, and you're gonna renovate it, okay? Well, the site acquisition cost would include the land and the building and whatever, but then construction costs would just simply be your renovation cost.
Not including your soft costs.
No, the soft costs are gonna be included in, for the most part, it's gonna be in the construction side. Okay, the land costs are usually going to be kept separate, but you know each one of these things is a little bit different. In this case, this 5 million could represent nothing but raw land. This 5 million could also represent it's raw land with a pre-existing building. Okay, and we are sort of ready to begin whatever construction process that we're going to begin. Okay, don't get too hung up on that, because ultimately all we end up doing is just adding the two together. Okay.
I have a question.
Yep.
In case you have to remove trees or other stuff.
That would also be under site acquisition. Okay. Okay. Then, so to the site acquisition, we're going to add in our construction cost. Okay. So, what sort of construction cost? Now, this once again makes the assumption of whether or not.
Another 5 million.
I'm sorry?
Another 5 million.
Okay, so we're basically saying that there's probably already something there in addition to the building, or in addition to the land. This is kind of the assumption that you're making, okay? All right, so you're saying another 5 million? You sure you just want to go with another 5 million? You don't want to go with more?
You need 30 million. If you have 5 million,
15.
site, you need more 30 million.
Okay, let's go to 15. Make it a decent sized project. Okay, so 20 million. And that's going to be our total expected development cost, okay? Okay, everybody good so far? All right. Now, the next one, we're going to multiply this by our loan to value ratio. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second, for those of you that are a little bit new. All right. So one of the first things that you're going to do, for this project, in terms of getting the financing for the project, you're going to approach a lender, you're going to approach a development partner, whoever. But in this particular case, we're really sort of looking at it. What is the percentage that we're going to be able to borrow, okay, on this deal? Sort of a loan to value ratio. So in other words, with a total $20 million construction cost or development cost, what percent of that are we going to borrow as our loan, okay? Now, more than likely, the highest that it would, even if it was, let's say apartments that were HUD financed in some way, you might be able to get to like 90%, but more than likely, it's going to be probably 80 or 70 or maybe even 60 in some cases percent. So anybody want to toss out a percent here?
75.
70 or 75? Which one do you want to use? 70.
70.
Okay. 70% loan to value. All right. Okay, so in this case, that is going to give you the dollar amount
14.
for the permanent mortgage. Okay? I'm going to trust you on that calculation.
That's right.
I know. Just messing with you. Okay, 14 million is going to be our permanent mortgage. All right. Now, this is the only time that you have what I would call kind of a serious sort of calculation to perform in terms of getting the mortgage constant, which we'll talk about here. Okay. All right, so what we're going to need to do, we're going to have to, first of all, know what the details are of the loan that we're getting. We know that we're obviously borrowing 14 million, so that's going to be, in essence, our loan amount. But we also have a couple of other inputs here. We need an interest rate and a loan term in terms of years, the amortization period. So in this case, give me the interest rate that you want to use.
This is just on the construction.
Well, no, this is the permanent loan.
Permanent?
Yep.
All right.
6%.
Yes.
Okay, 6% for our interest rate. Okay, and for our loan term in terms of the amortization period, not necessarily how long the loan is, but how long you're going to amortize the payments over.
Let's do standard 30.
15.
I would say 15. But we could cut the difference. All right, let's just say 15. What the heck? Okay, 15 years. All right. So we've got the basic 3 pieces of information that we need in order to calculate what is going to be referred to as our loan constant. All right. Well, actually, only 2 pieces of information we need for the loan constant is our interest rate and our loan term. But to get our payment or our debt service, then we would need all 3. All right. So in this case, how many of you know what a loan constant is? None of you. Okay.
Wouldn't it be that just the interest portion?
It's an interest factor, sort of, and what it does is it's basically taking and sort of ignoring what the mortgage amount is and simply assuming the mortgage amount is like $1, okay? And then using an interest rate and a loan term to come up with a mortgage constant. Let me sort of show you here what we are going to do. All right, so first, we're going to set the calculator 12 payments per year. Since this is going to be a monthly mortgage. Clear everything out. And then you're going to put in 6% as your interest rate, 15 shift in as your term, and whenever you do that, if you've got it set for 12 payments per year, it's going to pop up in your display 180. And what that means is 15 years times 12 monthly payments, or 180 total. All right. Then you're going to put in $1 as your present value, or your loan amount. Then you are going to solve for payment, and that is going to give you your monthly mortgage constant. I'm going to write that up here. Monthly mortgage constant. And then you're going to multiply that by 12 to get what we're actually going to be solving for, which is your annual mortgage constant. Okay, so let's do that real quick. Okay, that's what you should get here for the monthly mortgage constant is negative 0.0084385, and this kind of keeps going. Just while it's in the display, just go ahead and hit multiply by 12, and now you get 0.101262819. Now this is one instance. This is probably the only time that you want to carry this stuff out to multiple decimal places. And the reason for that, because it actually has an impact. Okay, I'm going to explain what that impact is right now. All right, so ignore for a moment that our permanent mortgage over here is $14 million. Okay, just sort of ignore that completely. All right, so if we were to borrow $1, okay, our mortgage was $1, then what this is saying is that our monthly mortgage payment on $1 would actually be less than 1 penny per month. Does everybody see that? It'd be like 0.8 of a penny. Everybody follow that? The annualized amount that we would be paying each year on $1, okay, would be the equivalent of 10 cents a year. Does that make sense? Okay, now you're saying, well, why would you ever want to do that? Okay, this is kind of goes real quick little story. This whole, notion of using a financial calculator really didn't begin until probably the late 70s, early 80s of having a business financial calculator to be able to do these sorts of calculations. And so, before that time, the computing power and specifically, whether using slide rules and other means of doing these calculations, what would happen is that folks would do all these sort of calculations and then put them in a book that was like a book of tables, financial tables. And in essence, the book of financial tables would be organized for, if it was a mortgage loan table, by the interest rate on the, let's say on the, basically on the, brain dead here today, on the y-axis, I'm sorry, on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis you would have, let's say, the loan term. And in essence, you would be able to go in and sort of pick whatever interest rate, whatever term that you were searching for, and then it would already have pre-calculated either the monthly mortgage constant or the annual mortgage constant, okay? And so it's just kind of a predecessor to using the financial calculator, but it also has some value in kind of being able to tell you that really, if you do just sort of look at it as a kind of like $1, it's a way of sort of saying, well, what percent of the loan are you, or what percentage of the loan amount are you paying each month or each year? And so in this case, you're really paying about 10% a year, even though it's a 15-year loan. So you can kind of sort of say, well, if you're doing that, then that means over 15 years, you're probably paying back 150% of the loan. Okay, in other words, and that other 50% is what? Interest. Okay, so this equates to the principal and interest. Now, so what it also means is that you can take any loan amount. So if we were to just say, all right, once again, ignore what our permanent mortgage actually is, and let's just say that our loan amount was $100,000. We could simply multiply that 100,000 times, basically, in this case we want the annual mortgage constant, the 0.1012 whatever, and what you're going to end up with is your annualized payment for that is going to be what, $10,126.28. Does that make sense? Okay, that's why you need to carry it out, okay? Because in this case, rounding it off at like 2 decimal places, you're not going to get anywhere close to the right answer, okay?
How do you get the calculator to do more numbers?
Hit the shift key, the gold key, hit the equal key, which underneath the equal key it says DISP or display, and then hit 9. And what they'll do is they'll kick out the decimal places to 9 decimal places. Okay? All right, everybody good with that? Okay, so.
Actually, sorry. When I'm doing the calculations, I keep coming up with a different number, so I think I'm doing something wrong.
Okay, so start once again.
Yeah, I have the 12 payments.
Okay, 6%, you are definitely hitting 15 shift in.
Oh, that's where I'm missing.
Okay. All right, so we'll make the difference. Because if you only hit 15 in, that's telling the calculator, that in this case, that would be the equivalent of 15 months.
Right.
Okay. All right, are we good? Okay, so, just gonna go back to our, filling in our sheet here. Okay, so in this case, you're gonna multiply the permanent mortgage times the annualized mortgage constant. So that's where you're just going to write in here the 0.101262819. Multiply that out, and that is going to give you, in essence, your cash required for debt service. Or, in other words, your annual mortgage payment. Okay. Everybody good? All right. So once we've got that, then we need to multiply the cash required for debt service times the lender required debt service coverage ratio. So let's talk about that. All right. So whenever getting a commercial real estate loan, one of the first things that the lender is going to do in order to make you that loan is they're going to say, all right, we're willing to make you this loan, but we need to ensure that you're going to have enough cash flow off of this property in order for us to get paid back. Okay? Seems like a simple sort of request. Okay? Now the question is, how much of a cushion are they going to require? And that's where the debt coverage ratio comes into play. All right? The debt coverage ratio, as a formula, is equal to the net operating income off of a property divided by the annual debt service. Okay? Now, if you think about that for a second, and you go back to what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago in terms of kind of the operating statement, I mean, you remember we had potential gross income, minus vacancies and collection losses plus other income gave us effective gross income, subtracted out total operating expenses, which gave us net operating income. But after that would be subtracting out annual debt service, which would then give us basically before tax cash flow. All right. So what we're in essence saying is, all right, we've got all the way down to this point in the property of net operating income. This is the money the property is generating after we've paid all of our operating expenses, after we've taken into consideration, you know, the vacancies and collection losses. So this is the amount of money that we really have left over in order to pay our lender, okay? And so what our lender is in essence saying, let's just sort of, to kind of keep the numbers relatively simple, let's say we get all the way down here, and this is $100, all right? And in this case, the lender were to say, all right, I want something like a 20% cushion. So the debt service coverage ratio would be basically 1.2. Well, what you would do to find the annual debt service is simply take the 100 divided by 1.2, and what you're going to get is $83.33, okay? And what that's basically saying is that $100 is 20% greater than the 83.33. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now your natural inclination is to say, well, wait a second, wouldn't it be 80? No, we're not subtracting. You know, this is obviously where we are dividing the 100 divided by 1.2 to get the 83.3, or multiplying the 83.3 times 1.2 to get the 100. And so here, this annual debt service that's the most that the lender would allow us in terms of our annual mortgage payment, because what that means is that would leave $16.67 left over, that in the event that you underestimated or potentially, you know, didn't really take into account all of the factors that go into calculating net operating income, that you've got enough of a cushion here to be able to do what? To pay off the lender. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay. Now, for our problem, okay, we've got the cash required for the debt service, $1,417,679.47. Okay. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to, number one, have to know what the lender is going to allow us for our debt coverage ratio, and then that will tell us what we need to be able to achieve for our net operating income. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the lower, like if we put 1.2, the lower the debt service coverage ratio, the more the lender trusts us, okay? The higher the debt service coverage ratio, the less they trust us, or the less they trust the income. So for example, let's just say that the lender was willing to give us a 1.0 debt service coverage ratio. Then that would just simply mean we need to have net operating income, in essence, just simply equal to whatever we've got coming in the door, so there would be nothing left over, nothing left for chance. Lender would not go for that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, because there's no cushion there to basically as a backstop. Whereas if you were to have, let's say, a 1.5 debt service coverage ratio, then that means, for this little example, that would be $66.67 would be the most that they would allow you, and that would give them a pretty big cushion of like $33 or in one sense 33%. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so now you tell me what debt service coverage ratio requirement is your lender going to require of you?
1.5.
That's pretty high. That's a little bit too much.
1.3.
1.3.
Okay, let's go with 1.3. A bit more realistic. Okay, so 1.3. So now all we have to do then to calculate the NOI is to take the 1.3 times 1417679.49, and you end up with required NOI of 1842,983.33. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, everybody good with that? Okay, so that, now then, if we put in our debt service coverage ratio up here of the 1.3, and we multiply that out, that is going to give us now the required net operating income. Okay? And so we'll erase all this so we can kind of fit it in here. Okay, so that's going to be the 1842,983.33. Okay, everybody cool? Any questions up to that point? All right, so we're going to erase this. Okay, so we've popped that in. We've got our required net operating income. Then we're going to be given, in this case, the estimated operating expenses. They're not passed through the tenant. Okay, so estimated operating expenses. So these are going to be the, when it says not passed through the tenants, what does that mean? It means these are the ones that we're going to have to pay as the owner of the property. Does that make sense? Okay, so in this case, what dollar amount, and once again, this is going to be a given. So what dollar amount are we going to pop in there?
30%.
Okay, maybe, why don't we just,
Give a number.
yeah, just give me a number. Let's just say 500,000. How's that? All right. So, in this case, we've got that. That is going to be added. So, which is going to give us, in this case, our required effective gross income. All right, so we add those two together.
2,942. 983.
Okay, 2,342,983.33. Okay, all good? Okay. Yep.
When I do the cash required times 1.30, I get 31 cents.
Yeah, 31 cents too.
It's probably because I left it in the calculator as it was.
Oh, after.
Yeah, I didn't like re-put it in,
Okay.
so it's just rounding.
Okay.
That's not going to be enough rounding to trip you up.
Okay.
Okay.
Question.
Yep.
So if the expenses are 500,000,
Mhm.
if their expenses, how come we're adding?
We're working backwards.
Oh,
So what we're doing is basically, if you think about it, net operating income is here, but what's right above net operating income on our operating expenses? And right above that are the effective gross income. So we're literally sort of going in the opposite direction. Okay? Okay. So we get down, we've got required EGI of that amount. Then we need to take and we need to divide that number by our expected occupancy rate. Okay, so this would be for the project, and this is going to be based on, you know, what we feel like is happening currently in the market with other similar properties. So in this case, give me a number.
90%.
90%? Okay? Okay, so divided by 90%, and that's going to equal our required gross revenue. Okay. Okay. So required gross revenue, $2,603,314.82. Okay. You good? All right. Almost there for this part. Then we're going to take and say, okay, that's the total amount of income coming in the door on the property, or would be, assuming that level of occupancy, or that's really 100%, assuming sort of 100% occupancy, because we're sort of backing into this number. All right, the 90% occupancy is reflected obviously in the effective gross income. So this would be the most that we could effectively achieve if 100% occupied. Then we divide that by the leasable square feet, and that is going to give us the rent required per square foot. All right, so now in this case, let's say we've got 100,000 square feet. All right, 603, 314, 82 divided by 100,000 square feet. So the total required rent per square foot would be $26.03 per square foot per year. Okay? And you'd obviously have to be given the leasable square feet. Okay? All right, does that make sense to everybody? Okay, is there any piece about that that doesn't make any sense? Okay? So, once again, to recap, let's say that market rents for this kind of property are sitting at 30 bucks a square foot. What is this model telling us?
Yay.
Go.
Okay, it's a good thing. Okay, if market rents are 30, we only need to achieve 26, then that's a good thing. But if market rents are sitting at 20 bucks a square foot and we need to get 26, bad idea. Okay, is everybody cool with that? Yes, no, possibly could be. All right, so let's do this. Let's have you do one of these on your own. Okay, I'm just going to give you the inputs. All right, or actually I'll let you come up with the inputs. Okay, so we'll just sort of start with the site acquisition.
Should we use the other side?
Yeah, use the other side. Okay, so give me a dollar amount for the site acquisition. This is, I'm going to get, all I'm going to do is we're going to give you the inputs and then you're going to have to do the outputs.
3 million.
3 million. Okay, construction cost,
8 million.
okay, loan to value ratio,
0.8.
okay, 80%. Okay, for the permanent mortgage, interest rate,
8%?
80% for loan to value, but what for the interest rate for the loan?
I was gonna say 8%.
Okay, you're saying 8%? Oh, okay, oops, yeah. All right, so higher interest rate, all right, interest rate. What about the loan term in years?
Another 15 years.
Okay, well, that's just something different.
Okay, 20.
All right, 20 years. All right, then we drop down. Okay, debt coverage ratio requirement. Okay, so 1.25, all right? Operating expenses, dollar amount.
250.
You know what, I'm gonna go easy on you on this one. I'm just gonna say 0,
Oh.
all right?
Wow.
All right, occupancy rate,
85%.
all right, 85%. And leasable square feet,
Let's go 100,000 tip.
150,000.
50.
probably, given that our total budget on this one was 11 million and the previous one was 14 million, so probably something less than 100,000. Or we can go with 100,000. I don't care. Let's just go with 100,000. It's really not going to matter. All right, 100,000. Okay, now you got all the inputs. You figure it out. Definitely take it seriously because you're going to do this on the quiz. Practice it. So the answer is going to be $12.99. So if you match with that, then you know you did it right.
Can you send the
Shift equal 9. Okay, as you're finishing, just kind of pop your hand up real quick and let me know you got it. Okay, so 2 of you got it already. All right, good. And did you match? Okay, good.
If I'm off a penny, it's okay?
Yep, no, Penny, I can live with that.
Change it again for the decimals.
Okay, shift equal 9. Okay, give you another 5 minutes to finish up.
Thank you.
When we're in the calculator, it's always gonna be negative numbers when we're doing that kind of thing?
For the loan, brain, for whatever reason, is not functioning well. Red Bull's not working. The mortgage loan constant is going to be negative, yes.
Oh, so it gives us a negative number, but when we do the calculation, we don't consider that as negative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so for those of you that are already done, let's do this. Let's work back the opposite direction, so the bottom of the page. But let's just say, okay, we found that our answer is $12.99, which means that's the minimum that we would be able to accept, correct? All right, to be feasible. So let's just say that the market rent is $16 per square foot per year, okay? Now, look at the bottom half of the sheet and work backwards to calculate, in essence, your construction cost and your site acquisition cost. Everything else is going to stay the same. Everybody understand what I'm asking you to do? Okay?
So we're saying that
Expected monthly rent, we're gonna use 16?
Correct. In other words, on the bottom half of the page, the backdoor approach, what do you start with?
100,000.
You start with the leasable square feet, yes. Then you multiply it by the average rent per square foot. That is where you're going to use the 16. Because that's what the market rent is. And we want to work backwards to get what our site acquisition costs and our construction costs are going to be. And we'll talk about those when we get there. That'll give you something to work on for those of you that are kind of a little faster. Okay, so how many of you still have not gotten the original $12.99? Anybody? Okay, so.
Oh, no, I got
Got
it.
it.
Okay, so everybody, most everybody's got it? Okay, a couple of you still, okay, give you another minute or so. Okay, for those of you that already have it, all right, so what you can do now is on the bottom half of the sheet, you're going to work the opposite direction. And so what you're going to start with on the bottom half of the sheet is the leasable square feet of the 100,000. And you're going to use the market rent of $16 a square foot. Okay? And then just work your way on down the page using, once again, the calculations that are given to you there. And what you're going to be solving for is the maximum supportable total project cost, which is going to be $13,549,000. It's not really the construction cost. This will be the total. So this is going to be the total supportable, or well, total project cost. Okay, and then we'll have to give you some additional assumptions for the construction and the site fees.
We just use the top line.
I used 8 million.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you could do that too. Okay, so if we actually use the 8 million
It's just 5.
as the construction, then you're going to be left
So
over
there's
with.
no operating expenses for this one?
Correct. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and use the 8 million, that's fine. Let's just go ahead and do that. That
So
will,
then it would still be,
5 million.
so you would end up then with
5.5.
I got it. I was in buying my talk, I did it like 3 times, I was like, wait, it's not working.
That's a tricky part. Why, where?
So wait, then, the reasonable square feet are 100,000, the expected average rent is 14?
no, 16.
16.
He got me. Did you get her to do that price over the phone? Oh, yeah.
The expected average rate, point is, oh, the same 185?
Yeah, so we're working backwards. And once again, if you need some assistance, use your neighbor on this.
I got 23 cents, but
Well, I'm not going to worry about that. Once again, I just plugged it into Excel, so that's the reason. Yep,
I have a question on the second one.
yep.
On the second one, you don't have the cash required for debt service.
You don't need it because you're basically, if you sort of look at the operations there, you're just going to take the expected net operating income, divide that by the debt service coverage ratio, divide that by the mortgage constant, divide that by the maximum loan to value. So you're able to skip the steps of actually putting a number on paper,
Oh, it's my.
and then ultimately end up with the total supportable cost.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what it is.
I don't think he like knows enough, you know what I mean, about like, I explained this to him.
He doesn't know the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so if you're working the bottom half, what you should end up with, if you use the same amount of 8 million for the construction cost, then what that means, and this is where the value of this begins to come into play, is it's basically saying this project would still be successful, and you could actually pay more than 3 million for your land. You could pay up to 5.5 million for the land and still satisfy the conditions of feasibility for the project. Does that make sense? Okay. So the bottom half of the sheet, what you should end up with is 13,549,486 as your total supported project cost, the overall development cost, if you will. Then subtract out the 8 million in construction cost. That would leave you with a site acquisition cost maximum of 5,549,000. And so this is really valuable. You know, looking at it from this angle is how well someone has priced their land. okay? Whether they've overpriced it, they've underpriced it, you know, based upon what you can actually build on that land and what you can charge and rent. That, you know, for example, if you've got someone out there in the marketplace and this piece of dirt that you need to do this project, and they've priced the land, let's say at $7 million, this project is a non-starter, okay? But if they price the land something less than, you know, 5.5 million, then it looks like there's a chance that the project, you know, could be successful based on all the other conditions that you have set in terms of the assumptions. Yep.
What about like closing costs, fees, and everything associated with
You just throw it all in there.
into this?
Yeah, into the acquisition cost of the land. So anything, all you're really saying is this is going to be kind of all inclusive of all those costs.
Okay. So would you increase or decrease your purchase price on an asset by like 5% because of closing costs?
Yeah, probably. Okay. So has everybody got a kind of a reasonable handle on that?
This is the hard question.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does this cover just 2 questions on
2 questions, yes.
And they count for double points on each question, right?
No. Okay. Are we good with this? Yes, no, possibly could be.
Actually, can you go over the second one?
Okay. All right.
What was the final answer again?
The final, well,
I just want to say the final. I just want to.
the final answer for the site acquisition cost would be 5.5 million,
Right. Okay.
or $5,500,000, $49, you know, 49,000, blah blah blah. Okay. So if we were to actually, just for those of you that want to kind of, okay, so the total leasable is the 100,000. Okay, and then the average rent. We said was going to be $16 a square foot, which is going to give us basically our PGI.
$1,600,000.
So 1,600,000 as our PGI. Then our occupancy rate was what?
85%.
85.
Okay. All right. Which is going to give us our effective gross income.
3,360,000.
1,360,000, right?
All right. And then from that, subtract out the operating expenses.
Which were 0.
And then that gives us net operating income. Okay. All right. Then we simply divide that by our debt service coverage ratio. We do also divide it by our annualized mortgage constant and our loan to value. And all of those are going to give us our maximum supportable total project cost. Okay. Then from there, we're going to subtract out our construction cost, which we had said was what? 8 million?
8 million.
And then that's going to give us our basically site acquisition. Okay, so if we do this, okay, our debt coverage ratio is what for this one? 1.3?
1.25.
1.25, okay. What was our mortgage constant on this one?
8. I'm sorry.
That's really better.
0.1003.
Okay,
7280.
okay. Read it out to me one more time. Point.
0.1003. 7280.
That correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and then our loan to value was what?
80%.
80%. Okay, so divide by, all right? So let's take that. Divided by 1.25, divided by 0.100372808, divided by 0.8 equals 13,549,486 minus 8,549,486.43. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Okay? So once again, what is that telling us? That is telling us that is the maximum amount that we could spend on the land. Okay? But also, you know, here's another way of looking at it. And this is part of what I'm trying to get you to do is, okay, if that's the maximum amount that we could spend on the land, but we actually only had to spend $3 million on the land, then that means we could do what? Spend more on the construction cost. Does everybody sort of follow that? So it's another way to kind of, you know, think about it, that you've got an extra like 2,500,000 something that you could add to the 8 million in terms of your construction cost, because the maximum you can spend for the total project would be obviously still the 13 million. Now here's the thing. Every single step of this is pretty much an assumption, okay? I mean, yeah, you pretty much know, okay, this is a leasable square feet. We're going to talk about leasable versus gross a little bit more today. But, you know, so once again, you're pretty much going to know what that's going to be. The expected rent per square foot, this is once again market driven in the sense of this is what other projects are yielding in the marketplace, okay? Occupancy rate, you know, part of what I'm wanting you to also sort of capture here, whenever we get to some of these assumptions like the occupancy rate, okay, let's say the market occupancy and what you're sort of expecting of your project is 85%, but how could you be more conservative? You could do what? Lower. Drop it. You could say, okay, I want to be ridiculously conservative, you know, on, you know, my analysis, and you can sort of shave off a little bit of this, maybe take it down to 80 or 75 or whatever, and just sort of see, well, what resulting impact is it going to have. And then, you know, as you get to operating expenses, well, in this case, we're making the assumption of what? This is pretty much an absolute triple net lease, so the tenant is the one paying all of the operating expenses, so we're not responsible for anything. So that takes a big burden off of us in terms of having to worry about that. And then the debt service coverage ratio, I mean, lenders can change their mind. Different lenders are going to have different debt service coverage ratio requirements, but we want to hope that we can kind of lock that in along with whatever our interest rate and our loan term is. And then the same thing, you know, what is the loan to value requirement that lender is going to charge versus maybe another one? You know, all of this impacts, in essence, what you can spend on the property. And so it's extremely important that, you know, you kind of take this model, and whenever you use it, I think, you know, the most important thing to sort of say is just that you're just being realistic. You're not trying to, here's the biggest problem, and no matter how many times I have said this over the past 30-something years of teaching this stuff, invariably people don't listen. But the lesson is this: your job is not to force this into making it feasible. Your job is to put in accurate numbers and see what it tells you, okay? Because the normal approach that most everybody takes, sadly, and developers do the same thing, is they try to force it. They try to say, well, market rents are 16 bucks a square foot. They've done their market research, they've gotten that number, that's a real number, okay? That's what it should be. But then what do they say? My project is better than everybody else's project, therefore I'm going to be able to charge $17 a square foot, okay? And so they put that in the model, and you know, they're basically living some sort of weird fantasy that they may be able to charge substantially more than the market. Does that make sense? Or, you know, they come down to the occupancy rate. Okay, the market occupancy is legitimate 85, and they're saying, once again, we're going to do a better job than everybody else in the property management. You know, we're going to have virtually 100% occupancy. Okay, well, you start changing those assumptions, and that basically is going to start inflating how much you can afford to spend on it, and it's going to make it look as though it's a much more viable project than what it really is. Does that make sense? Okay, so my advice is always try to use the numbers that are as conservative as possible, even if that maybe is not what you're, you know, potentially giving out to the general populace, but at least internally you are being real about what these numbers are. And you know, you don't want to mislead anyone, but the point being is you really need to take a good, strong look at what's the most conservative estimates for each of these and not inflate them, and then see what it tells you. Okay? Make sense? Okay, any questions? All right, let's move forward.
Just a question, what was the 3 million?
No, I was just simply saying, like in the previous model, we had said the site acquisition costs were like 3 million. So what if we could actually get the land for 3 million? And that means then we could actually spend more on the construction cost. Okay. All right. Any other sort of final questions with this before we put this to bed? Okay. All right. You want to take a break, or are we good? It's up to you. I just figured we would. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. Actually, you should be able to go upstairs to the 3rd floor, and they've got food in the hallway up there. Once again, no, my department's paying for it, so we can definitely eat it. 3rd floor, same location as we are, but directly upstairs. So go up there and grab some food if you want it. You've got 10 minutes.
So the strategy that I was talking about yesterday, which is essentially purchasing properties well below what they're worth at 80-20, and then
refinancing.
Yeah, but borrowing the money at 10% and having a blended rate of around 6 because of the low interest rate of 80, and then refinancing, and then it confuses me. I'm like, okay, so the goal is to obviously refinance and be able to pay the 10% and the equity for the debt back to the investor.
Yeah.
So how do I like think about that or create a model in which I can input numbers so that I can ensure on the refi that I can, you know, pay them back?
This is going to be a multi-step model. I mean, you're just going to have to sort of block it out step by step, and then see what ultimately is transpiring from one step to the next.
Like, is there a simple way of looking at it in which, like, if I was to buy it at, you know, 40% below what it's actually worth, and then refi at, so no, if I buy it at 60% of value and then I refi at 80, does that mean that it's like a safe margin, or do I have to break it down into these grades? Like, is there a way to look at it kind of like that? Or like if there's a 20% increase?
I mean, yes, you can build a very simple Excel model that would.
Yeah, because it confuses me when I try and break it down, but I need to figure out
You should sort of take it step by step and just sort of say, okay, I bought it for this, I financed it this way, this is the potentially value of the cash flow that it's generating that would substantiate this dollar amount of a loan, and then the transition from the original financing structure to the new financing structure, and then what that's going to mean in terms of who's going to pay and how much they're going to cost.
I guess that would be a different, on a single family house, it would be based on income. Like if I had bought, like Justin just got a contract for a house for $250 for $100 grand. You know what I mean? So if you buy it for $100 grand, he finances that $100 grand plus construction costs, he refis out, pays him his money back, and like he does it in 3 months. Now, you know, he has the property project.
Right. Question 6 and 9.
Yeah. Follow the online.
I have a question.
I guess at some point, we'd be able to just.
Well, to a certain extent, because some of it, I mean, you don't necessarily have to go through all those steps. That's kind of where we're going to go back and sort of talk about, you know, a little bit less complicated before we get more complicated.
Yeah, that's what I did. It's like step by step.
What would you say is, because now I'm getting involved through this, it's cool because I'm getting involved in projects way earlier. What do you say is like the 3 indicators when you're looking at a deal? For one of my clients, as they give me like their performance or whatever. Am I looking at NOI? They're usually RESI.
Yeah, but it's not just you're looking at NOI. This is going to be, it's going to be a real, legitimate NOI. I mean, and it's not, once again, they're not fluffing up the numbers.
Yeah. No, and it's funny you mentioned that because his deal in Wynwood, his rents are probably, you could get $3.
Like I know all about
But he always carries like a multiplier down. He's carrying like 290 or something like that. And I got to see it live Thursday. This hit. I mean, how about IRR?
Well, it depends on once again, that gets into the, you know, in this we're making the assumption that they're putting in 20%, but here we're not looking at the return on that 20%. We're just simply looking at, based upon the financing structure, is it feasible? So that's the other piece that we have to add to this.
What's the, okay, so it's a combination of the combination of all the factors to determine whether it's a good deal and potential development or not. So IRR, net present value, right? We're looking at that. Your NOI. Does it matter if at first it's like negative or?
Well, I mean, in the lease-up period, it's going to be negative. I mean, until it's fully leased.
Right, because there's
income.
Your transition year or whatever.
Right.
What's something that you think is like for big deals like the type we do, that is something we're supposed to be looking at?
I mean, ultimately, it all comes down to, what's the cash flow and what's the cost?
What's the cash flow and what's the cost? And
I mean, it's not rocket science. It's just that we add in a lot of other things for you to take a look at, but at the end of the day, it's really cash flow and cost.
Is IRR a true representation of returns?
Well, it can be. I mean, it depends on
from
whose perspective are you looking at. If you're looking from the investor's perspective or the developer's perspective, because they may not be the same because of how much they have invested. Because in this, we're making the assumption that they're putting in 20% equity, but where is that 20% equity coming from? Is it coming from one person? Is it coming from multiple people? Are they each contributing equally? You know, what is going to be their rate of return?
And they're split.
Right. This model ignores that. This model is just simply saying, based upon the financing, you know,
what your back of the napkin check before you jump into the water. How's the other class? Good? Oh yeah? You're not in the law one?
No, I'm just doing this as a, like,
I will have trouble with setting up.
like, I don't know. I'm not,
You
I'm
got
not in
enough
those.
Is that a family of 3? Are we getting this family style? This is my breakfast.
Yeah.
I weighed myself yesterday. I was doing not carrying weights on the scale.
That's the only thing I need to remember, like that 85%.
Yeah.
Elected occupancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's give it.
I'm looking at it now.
Yeah, but I just need to remember to divide that.
I'm gonna have
No, on that one you multiply. Well, it depends on which problem. Oh, we're talking about the bike. Things like that.
The law exam's next week, right?
Still getting based on the rent market, right?
Are you on the software one?
Halfway through the last class felt much more directed.
Right.
You're like in the middle.
You have a question here.
Yeah, when I got the report, I got it. Right from market analysis. He started to measure it.
This said the review, and I'm like,
He expected.
oh, I'm sorry, you said, yeah. I was like, just
I gotta say, meetings send an email so that we can figure out.
Same thing like the partial seal on people because there's nothing in there.
What's going on, man? What's up, bro? How you doing, bro? Doing well. Doing good, bro. How's the semester?
This one's a breeze. This is expecting the next couple of classes to be
Read the law exams next week.
well, we have the law exam.
It's next week, but we're going over, I think, everything today.
And he posted a guide.
I saw that it should be 5 days ago. And it's over like contracts and stuff, things like that. To be honest with you, when you have my realtor's license, and a lot of that that we go over in the class, they teach on the real estate license course because tech contracts and law and stuff like that, so I'm not too worried about it. Like always like the LLC and all that stuff.
Well, that's pretty basic. You learn that.
Yeah, that's basic.
I can start with one part, I guess, right? Oh, sure, let's start with another part. Goes up on the page, it goes into another part.
Oh, Professor, can I go on last year's video? Check out the content for the next quiz?
I heard that one.
Would be
Probably not, since we used a different book this year.
oh, okay.
Okay. We go back, this is in scope 2. Okay, we'll wait another minute or two.
Is this going to be available weekly now?
Well, I'm sorry?
Food?
Well, for the next couple of weeks, yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's a full time and a half.
I've been meaning to have you take advantage of the past couple of weeks, but I forget.
Oh my God.
We got two yesterday that, like, super quick, like, we were texting and calling, and the lady's like, yeah, I want to sell for this much. And it's like a deal, offer it, but she like, does that work? So I have to connect to it today. Yeah, I mean, but we'll see, you know, those are, not too concrete.
What's the address? I'm kidding, bro.
Where is yours? In like Lake Worth or something?
I had no idea when I started for the
All right, as soon as John and Edward get back, we'll get started. Hopefully they'll be back in a minute.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Riviera?
At this point, I don't care.
You don't care either?
I said I don't care. Like,
I can tell you that. I'm starting to understand my finance costs.
it's fine, bro. It's already in the contract. Well, I know you're not
Just
making a use of that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's in,
Exactly, practical, it's practical.
just
You
Deerfield.
see where it goes to work.
Deerfield's not Palm Beach, you skew.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's not.
That's why I
Yes, it
didn't
is.
know
No,
that.
it's not.
Yes, it is.
Bro, it's
It
not.
doesn't come up on Broward, does it?
Yes, it does.
We'll have to do something else.
Basically, we're hitting Palm Beach, so.
You're like right on the.
No, but we're in Palm Beach, yeah. Like, I can't use BCPA on properties, on all of them. I only can use West Palm Beach properties.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I got that on
So
West.
you're not touching on
Not yet, we need Spanish speakers.
Exactly.
Feel that.
I'm not gonna waste everything, you know, like, send mail and texts.
I know people that go to Miami, but like obviously they do go to Miami.
Leasable versus gross. Is that
But we're hiring in Spanish.
Gross square footage.
So are you just doing, they're still primarily male?
Everything, text, buzz, mail, culture.
Yeah,
Any internet stuff?
All right, so we're still waiting on Edward.
Soon. Next class would be good, bro.
Huh?
Next class.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. All right,
Huh?
so
RBN?
before we get into the calculation of the bill to a certain percentage rate of return using our gross square footage for the calculations using net operating income and then the cost, let's talk for a couple of minutes about gross versus net square feet, because your text, they talk about it a little bit, and they're using both, and it may be confusing for some of you to actually really understand what is the difference, because they talk about like loss factor, and you're probably like, what the heck is that? And so let's just sort of give a simple example of the sort of gross versus net square feet. All right. A simple example that I like to use is like a standalone building, and that standalone building, the interior square feet is the net square feet, okay? That seems pretty simple, all right? The exterior, in other words, measuring the external, the sort of the footprint of the building, is going to be your gross square feet, okay? And you're going to say, well, is there really any difference between the two? Yes, okay? And just at a minimum, you think about like, just look at this building, and you look at the thickness of the walls, okay? So, you know, it's probably not quite an entire foot, but certainly pretty darn close to 12-inch walls, yes? Okay? And so, assuming that that's the case, well, that's 1 foot here, you know, 1 foot here, 1 foot here, 1 foot here, all right? In terms of the thickness of the walls. So if your interior space, let's say, is 20 feet times 15 feet, okay? You know, it's like a room. I mean, this room is obviously a little bit bigger than that. But let's just say 20 feet by 15 feet. What's the interior square feet?
300.
Okay, 20 times 15, so 300 square feet, and that would be our net. Okay, is everybody cool with that? Yes or no? Now the external square footage would be what? Well, you've got to add a foot here and a foot here, so really the length here, instead of it being 20, is actually what?
22.
22. And then for the outer wall on the 15 side, it's going to be 17. Does everybody understand that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now if you take 22 times 17, that's 374 square feet. Okay, so a difference, if that's the gross and the net was 300, then And the difference, 74 square feet would be the difference. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Now, that 74 square feet, this is where in the market, this gets really messy, okay? Because of how a property owner wants to lease a space versus what the tenant thinks that they're getting, okay? And obviously, that's a significant enough difference that that's gonna make a difference in terms of the total rent you pay, okay? That if I'm telling you that your rent is gonna be $10 per square foot per year, then what does that mean down here for this? Just on that difference, that's an extra $740 a year. Okay, well, look at in terms of the gross, 374 times 10, 3740, and then the net would be 3,000. So is that significant? Yes, it is very significant. And so my point being is, if I'm the property owner and I'm just simply telling you, I'm not really making a distinction, I'm just simply saying, rent's $10 a square foot. Okay, well, what would I, as the property owner, what would I prefer to be saying that I'm really renting? Gross. Okay, but yet the reality is, what you're really getting is the net. So you're, in essence, in one sense, getting screwed out of $740 as a potential tenant, depending on how the property owner. Now, hopefully, once again, more sophisticated players, more sophisticated market, you know, that is being accurately reflected in whatever it is that you're actually leasing and that sort of thing. But that's not always going to be the case, okay? Especially if you're dealing with like a standalone building where in many cases, you know, the property owners are saying, well, okay, you're renting the whole building, so you're renting the full exterior, okay? And, you know, so just keep that in mind is what because one of the things that your textbook talks about is this loss factor. Well, the loss factor is related to, in essence, how many of basically the gross square feet are you really losing, in essence, to get down to the net number, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so let's start off here with this first calculation. So just to kind of, those of you really trying to keep track of quiz questions and that sort of thing. So what we did earlier today, we covered two questions, basically questions 8 and 9, okay? Which dealt with basically the rent per square foot and dealt with sort of land cost, okay? Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So now we're going to go back to in essence, question 1, which is building to some sort of a rate of return. And so you asked the question earlier, you know, in the textbook it talks about you should be able to do a lot of these calculations in your head and, you know, very sort of simple, basic kind of calculations. Well, this is one clearly that fits the bill as it relates to that, because what you're doing here is, in essence, you're saying, all right, I've got a property and I set some sort of a standard, but I want to build to some sort of a simple return measure, okay? And that simple return, you know, in essence, is kind of like a cap rate, okay? But here, we're doing it on gross square feet, not on basically net square feet or leasable square feet. And so in this case, we're saying, okay, we want to build to a 10% return, let's say, all right? So that means if I have cost per gross square feet, now this would be construction cost, all right? And it would also more than likely include the land cost. So kind of overall, basically, cost per square foot for the property. All right, so you go out, you figure out what your building costs are, you figure out what your land costs are, and then you sort of divide all of that by the gross square footage of the building, And let's say that we end up with, I don't know, $250 per gross square foot. All right? So what we got to do is then just simply back solve into what would the NOI need to be on a gross square foot basis in order for us to meet our requirement of the 10% rate of return. So it's basically nothing more, it's just another way of kind of using the cap rate formula, okay? So it's not a complicated calculation. So in your head, what would it be? 25. Done. So therefore, so $25 as your annual NOI per gross square foot. Okay? So this would just simply be one return measure that you would want to potentially meet as a developer, that you would sort of pick out what you feel like.
Wait, so you just took the cost and you just did
10%, that's
Multiplied by the
0.1 times.
$250 times 10% is going to give you $25.
okay.
Okay? Just like the cap rate. Okay? Makes sense.
Question.
And the cost is a given?
Well, any one, okay, you're gonna have to be given two of the three. And then solve for the third. Okay?
125, you have NOI what?
Gross square feet.
Thank you.
Okay? Because most of what we've been doing traditionally with our calculations, instead of doing it on a per square foot basis in terms of the NOI and overall cost, we have simply been doing it as what is the dollar amount of the NOI? What is the dollar amount of the gross square footage? Or the cost for the gross square footage. And here we're just looking at it on a per square foot basis. And the reason that you might want to look at it on a per square foot basis is simply in many instances, that's how the rents are going to be quoted, that's how the construction costs are going to be quoted, okay, is on a per square foot basis. Does that make sense? Okay.
So I'm calling around different builders and asking, oh, what's the going cost to build a whatever type of box? And they're telling me, well, it's $1.50 a square foot, $2.50 a square foot. I'll take.
Well, it's gonna be a lot more than that, but yeah, yeah. If that's the construction cost, wow, we gotta. But no, it's gonna probably be north of $100 a square foot in most instances.
I'm just throwing out numbers.
Yeah.
But that's basically what I'm. In
Right.
my head, I'm surmising the calculation
Right.
based on these numbers and my rate of return.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's not. This is not rocket science. This is the easiest stuff ever, in the sense of you're just trying to get some sort of a threshold of saying that if you're spending this amount and you can get easily, much more than that, in terms of the overall rate of return in rent. I mean, like, for example, just to sort of throw something out there, I'm just trying to remember now. One of the things that I have always advocated is that whenever you're buying properties to like potentially invest in, especially ones that you're going to renovate, you always want to buy those properties at substantially below replacement cost. Okay, and what you mean by that is, okay, you've got this existing building. For whatever reason, it's either not rented or it's under rented. And under rented would mean you've got tenants in there that are paying ridiculously low rental rates, and it's criminal that they would be paying that low of a rental rate. They need to be kicked out. You need new tenants that are going to pay a much higher rental rate to justify a much higher overall value. Does that make sense? And so, if you're able to come in and, let's just say that maybe this would be your actual cost for sort of construction and land and so forth to basically, build a new building on this site. Okay, are you with me?
Yes, sir.
But because you're able to maybe go in, buy it at below replacement cost, And now granted, you may have to reposition them. There's a couple of different pieces in the process there. One is, okay, if the building is currently occupiable, currently usable, in its current condition, you can kick out a low-paying tenant, put in a higher-paying tenant, your job is done, you walk away, make money, you're happy. But most of the time it's going to be, you kick out the low-paying tenant, you go in and you do what? Make some upgrades to the property to be able to reposition the property to a higher quality tenant paying more money. Yes? Okay, so making the assumption that this would be kind of the all-in for sort of, you know, in essence, pretty close to maybe new construction, but yet you can buy a property that is maybe not completely functional, but close for 150, and then you're able to put in, let's say, another 50 to make it to where it's in essence equivalent to the 250 property, but your investment is only 200, then what does that mean? If you're able to then get 25 bucks a square foot off of a $200 investment, what does that mean your rate of return is going to be? So instead of getting a 10% rate of return, you would be able to get a 12.5% rate of return because your cost basis is only 200, but yet you're still getting the same rent as they were able to get. Now you're saying, well, how does that happen? That's all because of pricing imperfection in the market of where that, you know, you have somebody that owns something that they really don't know the value of what they have, or it could be that maybe they just simply want to dispose of it quickly because they're dealing with some sort of negative event in their life, a death, a divorce, you know, whatever it might be. It can also be the case they don't want to go through the brain damage of renovating the property because you have skill sets of being able to do that for much lower cost than maybe they have to be able to do that, or they don't want to take the risk simply because, you know, they just have never done that before, and so they're willing to price it below what maybe it ordinarily would sell for to allow somebody else to come in and be able to capture that market opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It also could be mismanagement where they're just lazy to.
No, I mean, as I said, you know, some of the properties that I, you know, had bought, you know, in the past, I mean, that was exactly the case. It was just, in a couple of instances, it was a situation of where you had people that had owned the properties, the same property, since the 1970s. And I bought them in the early 2000s, okay? So they had owned them for literally over, you know, 30 years and had not really substantially raised the rents for probably 10 or 15 years, okay? And so it was a family trust. And so the point was, at that point that I came in, I just was like, wow, I can't believe this is all they're charging in rent. You know, I'm just like, is this too good to be true? You know, I mean, it was one of those sort of epiphanies that you're just like, wow. But then, you know, as soon as I take possession of the property, the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to the tenant. I'm saying, okay, rent is going from here to here. And instantly they're like, okay, I'm moving out. And I'm like, good, you know, and get a new tenant, you know, basically raise the rent and fix the place up. Does it make sense?
Is that something that's easy to do? I mean,
well, it depends on the market. It depends on the market. It depends on the circumstances. Like I said, to me, the opportunity there was you had a situation. There was a very legitimate situation where you have a family trust that owns something that they're just not really even paying attention to what the value truly is on the properties. You know, they're absentee, sort of distant landlords, and so, you know, as such, nothing. They're still making money because their cost basis was from 1970. You know, so they're still getting a great rate of return as far as they're concerned, but the tenant is the one that's really, you know, coming out the winner for all those years of super low market rent. Make sense?
Well, I was just more about kicking somebody out. I mean, don't they have a lease that's in place that?
Yeah, but most of those leases, especially for those kind of properties, you know, might only be for a couple of years.
Or month to month.
Or month to month.
Okay.
Especially the ones that.
Yeah, I mean, and in many cases, that was the case, that some of these, you know, folks, it really was, their lease had expired years ago, but they were just simply on a month to month, and ultimately, you know, it's just kind of like, okay, see ya.
All right.
You got 30 days or 60 days to get out of here and move on. Now, is that cold and heartless and horrible for me as the new owner to come in essence kick out a tenant that's been there for the past 30 years? Some people might say so, but the reality of the situation was the property was up for sale. They could have bought it, and they probably should have.
Give them a chance to renovate it and move in, because I remember taking one. I moved in I got a job as an asset manager with a company, and one of my first jobs was to take this tenant to court, right? And we're in there, and make a long story short, to jump towards the end, when I went to look at this great apartment that I thought she was getting a great deal on, I almost rolled over. I mean, the cabinets were falling off the wall, the sheet racks were just, you could see where sewage overflow, you could see mold, and I'm not scared of mold. I love mold.
Wow.
Love it. But when I saw this place, I was like, no. And she owed $26,000 in rent. And this is New York, so she knows how to stretch it out. And I spoke to her, right? First she didn't want to talk to me because the way I was dressed, she thought I was on the attorneys, and I went to go see the place. She's Jamaican, I am Jamaican, we talked. And within a week she moved, and they couldn't get her for 6 years to move. But she just wanted someone to see her side of the story, why she was stretching out this great deal she was getting for this like $200, well, zero, because she wasn't paying any rent for 6 years.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, talking about this kind of deal, this is not the sort of thing you're going to open up the MLS and you're going to see a listing for. This is the sort of thing that, it's going to be usually an off-market deal that you're just going to have to find, But my point, getting back to the actual problem, is, this is just simply, it's a simple way to kind of get a sense for, if you're building or you're acquiring, what sort of rate of return are you desiring or can you achieve with whatever price point that you jump into the market with, okay? Because you could also, another perspective on this is that, well, that maybe this is what it's currently generating, but what if you can, knock that up another, few bucks a square foot per year? That's only going to enhance the overall rate of return, okay? That's what I'm saying, most of this is so basic, it's just about cash flow, cost, and return. It's as simple as that. But we complicate it in the sense of, yes, we want to make sure it's stabilized income. Yes, we want to make sure that it's truly reflective of market value, investment value, all that sort of thing. We want to make sure that we're taking into account what our cost of capital is. And we complicate things up a bunch. But for the most part, almost everything boils down to this. Okay.
This
all
is
right.
like a back of the envelope type of calculation.
Yep. Super simple. Super basic. Okie doke. All right. So. The next one deals with rent per leased square foot, okay? And in essence, making an adjustment for vacancies, okay, in terms of what the effective rent would be on a property. All right, so what you're gonna do, so give me a dollar per square foot in rent. Sort of, this in essence is gonna be the leasable, on the leasable square feet of a building. So this is per square foot per year, and this is leasable square feet. Okay, so give me a dollar now. Okay, $30. All right, so we've got $30 per square foot per year of leasable square feet. And let's say, okay, what sort of vacancy do we have on this property? Percentage-wise? 10%, okay? All right, so 10% vacancy. What we want to know, in essence, is what is the rent per leased square feet, okay? So here, all you're going to do is you're going to take basically the $30, multiply it by 1 minus the vacancy rate, of the 10%, and that is going to give us, in this case, the rent per leased square foot. All right, super basic calculation. All right, so pretty much just saying 30 bucks times what? 0.9. 27 bucks. Rent per leased square foot. All right, so what's the value of this little calculation? This is really just trying to get at what is the income the property is legitimately going to bring in if it's not 100% occupied. And you're just sort of trying to automatically sort of make an adjustment for whatever the market vacancy is, or for the vacancy for this particular property, to come up with, in essence, what is kind of an effective rent. Okay? We good? Any questions on that? I told you these were going to be easy. Okay? Yes, that is 2. Okay. Now, the next one is converting rent per leased square feet to rent per gross square foot. Okay, the difference is between the leased and the gross. Now, here is where basically they talk about a loss factor. All right, so first of all, let's get the leased rental rate. So what would you say, give me a dollar amount for the leased rental rate? And we could use what we used here. So 27, what the heck? Okay, so the leased square foot is 27, all right? So here, we want to adjust this basically to the gross, all right? So in essence, what we're going to do is we're going to basically, it's going to be 1 minus, in this case, the loss factor. Let's talk about what that is. Okay? Anybody have any idea what a loss factor is?
The non-leasable.
It's a non-leasable space, okay? So if we say we have a loss factor of 20%, what does that mean?
Generator rooms.
20% is not.
Yeah, the 20% we can't really lease or call it leasable square feet, okay?
Your restroom, the generator space, stuff like that, right?
Is the loss factor that 70
Roof.
square foot per person?
So in other words, yeah, it would basically be what that difference is.
That percentage.
Yeah, that percentage difference, okay? And so in this case, so basically it's going to be 27 times 0.8. $21.6. So what that's saying, here's another way of looking at it. If I'm quoting the rent on the property on a net square footage basis, the leased square footage basis, I'm quoting 27 bucks a square foot. But if I'm quoting it on a gross square foot basis, the equivalent would be $21.60 on a gross square foot basis. If we're trying to keep apples to apples kind of comparison with respect to the difference between the leased square feet and the gross square feet available on the property. Okay, does that make sense?
So this 2160, that's the number that you keep internally, or that's the number?
Yeah, I mean, once again, it's a question. Okay, I have 2 options. If I'm being legitimate and honest with the consumer, okay, as the property owner, I can say, I'm willing to lease you space in my building for 27 bucks a square foot and that is the leasable square feet that you are getting in the property. Okay? Or I can also say legitimately, I'm going to charge you $21.60, but that's going to be based on the gross square footage. Okay? And both of those are completely 100% legit. Now, what happens in practice in a lot of cases is that you'll have a property owner saying, oh, the rental rate is 27 bucks a square foot. And they just simply say that. Rental rate, 27 bucks a square foot. But it's not on the lease square feet, it's on the gross. So they can generate more money and be deceptive about what they're really giving you. Does that make sense? Okay? So all this is doing is just trying to create an apples to apples comparison between the lease square feet and the gross square feet.
Would that be more of a situation where you've got different available rental space and you kind of want it to compare next door that's renting on a gross?
Because what you may have, very simply put, you may have a core, like elevator core, that sort of thing. Right. You've got hallways, you've got restrooms, you've got all this other sort of stuff, so you've got 4 leasable spaces. Mm-hmm. The leasable space in one sense is, those spaces. But the gross is going to be all of that. Mm-hmm. And so the point is, what you may have, and what does happen in some cases, is that a property owner will say, yeah, you're paying rent and you're leasing this space, but you're also going to pay a percentage of the core space or the common area as well. Mm-hmm. But in some instances, they may actually have you pay, I'm trying to think the best way to put this. In other words, they're saying, all right, you're using all of this common and core space, so I'm charging you basically for a portion of that, but they're also maybe charging each of these other people a portion, but it may not be, it may end up actually being that they're charging each of you the full cost of that common area, not necessarily like a fourth of it. You follow me? So they can get more rent. Because they're saying you're using all of it, therefore you should pay for all of it.
So in that case, you would charge the usable space at one rate and then the common areas at a lower rate?
Yeah, well, yes, legitimately, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is not always a clear, honest, direct measure of the square footage that you are legitimately leasing, getting, being charged for relative to what maybe the property owner is trying to maximize their income and being maybe a little bit deceptive, whether on purpose or by accident, okay? So, it's not always where it's completely, a situation of where the property owner is trying to take advantage of the tenant. It may just very well be that, well, this is how we've just been doing it. We really didn't really ever think about it, or, whatever. And the tenant never really calls them on it. Or, it could just also be, in some properties, they're not even telling them what the per square footage cost is. They're just simply saying, you're paying $1,000 a month. And then as far as the square footage is concerned, it's almost irrelevant. It's just kind of like, well, you're paying $1,000 a square foot, but the reality is that's a very significant dollar amount per square foot when you really look at it. Okay? Make sense? Okay.
What would be the net factor?
Okay, well, in essence, the reverse of that. You're just going to basically, you just simply take this divided by that, we give you that.
So the 27 is the net.
Well, no, okay. This is gross. You're saying how do we, in essence, if we want to calculate the net, if you start with the gross, which whatever this number is the gross, and you divide it by this, then you're going to get the net. Working the backwards math is what I'm saying. Okay. Okay, moving forward. Okay, so the next one deals with stabilized net operating income per square foot calculation, per gross square foot calculation. All right, and so here we start out with whatever our gross square foot rental rate is. All right, so in this case, let's just, we can maybe, what the heck, use this up here, 2160. Okay, so that's our gross square feet NOI. All right, and I'm sorry, no, that is simply our gross square feet. Our rental income, that's really, well, I'm sorry, that's actually our gross, sorry about that. Gross income per square feet. Then from that, we are going to be subtracting out what are our expected operating costs. So basically our operating expenses net of recoveries. So what does that mean, net of recoveries? Just like we did in the previous problem, this is a different choice of words, but in essence, these are the expenses we, as the property owner, are responsible for. Okay, does that make sense? Net of recovery simply means that this is the amount of money that we're having to spend out of our own pocket that we are not recovering from tenants. Okay? Yes? Okay, so let's say that those operating expenses are on a per square foot basis, and this is also per square foot, work out to be $5. So 2160, oops, 2160 minus $5, 1660 would be the gross square foot NOI. Okay? So really, in one sense, just to kind of put things into perspective, this is not much different than, once again, we're sort of saying this is kind of like our effective gross income. This is subtracting out total operating expenses. This is giving us NOI. It's basically the same thing. Okay? So the answer to get the stabilized NOI, all we're doing is subtracting out whatever our operating expenses are on an annual basis, and so the answer would be the 1660. I can't possibly imagine anyone getting this question incorrect. But it's possible.
I'll figure it out.
You'll figure it out, and we'll figure out a way to get it wrong.
I'll figure it out.
All right. I'm counting on you, Alex. Okay.
I'll do a derivative somewhere and overcomplicate it.
Okay.
That's what I think. Yeah, I'll put some calculus on it.
Okay. So this next one is the expected yield . And once again, all of these are in your textbook, okay? So if you need to refer to the actual formulas and the calculations, they're all in the book. All right, so the expected yield on total development cost . Right? So here, let's say that we've got this expected stabilized NOI of $16.60. All right? And we're going to be dividing that by our cost per building square feet, gross building square feet. Okay? So our, in this case, our cost per building gross square feet that we've been using here, we have it the calculation on that here somewhere. Oh, here we go.
250.
250. All right, so the yield on that is going to be simply the 1660 divided by the 250. And so you're going to get basically 0.0664 or 6.64% would be your expected yield. Okay. So once again, this is all you're sort of doing is you're doing all these sort of calculations. In many cases, you know, you're sort of revising some of your numbers, but you're kind of sort of saying that you know, the original calculation you're getting 25 bucks a square foot of NOI. Here you're only really getting, after everything has been sort of adjusted, really 1660, which means that your return is really 6.64%. Okay.
Just a quick question on the quiz. Are the problems going to be like, okay, get this,
No,
this, and this?
I purposely have made them independent of each other. Okay. So I've tried to make it idiot-proof, okay, where there is no way you can get those wrong.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted, okay.
I'll figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, build up on each other.
All right, so the next one, this is, if you're keeping track, this would be question number 6, okay. So this one is replacement rent per gross square foot, okay? And in this case, what you're going to be given is kind of what your build to return percentage is. So let's say that's 15%. What the heck? Let's do something different. Okay, let's say our build to return is 15%. And in this case, our total cost for the building square footage per square foot is, give me a dollar amount, something we haven't used before. 300, what the heck? 300, all right. And in this case, our operating expenses are going to be what dollar amount per square foot? $7.50.
You said per square foot?
Per square foot.
That seems low.
Okay. So now let's do this calculation and explain it. So you should end up with $52.50 as the replacement rent per square foot. Okay, so let's explain. What is that? If your gross building cost per square foot is $300, you're building to a return of $15, and that gives you $45. That is, this in essence is giving you what? This is giving you your NOI. Is it giving you NOI?
Yeah.
Okay. And then your operating expenses are $750. Okay. So you add those in, and then that's saying that your gross rent would need to be $52.50 a square foot. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Okay. All right. Okay, this one's a little bit more involved, number 7, just in terms of math. So the replacement rent per leased square foot, okay? And in this case, because keep in mind the previous one was what? Gross. This would be leased, all right? So in this case, what we're going to start with is the rent per gross square foot, whatever that is. And then we're going to multiply that by, and this is where the math is just a little bit intensive. It's not that complicated, but it's just a little bit more involved. You're going to take and divide it by 1 divided by 1 minus the loss factor, whatever that is. And then you're going to multiply that by 1 divided by 1 minus, in this case, the vacancy rate. Okay, so you've got to be given all of those, and then ultimately, once you do that, that is going to equal then the replacement rent
Second part is the vacancy rate?
Yep. Per leased square foot. Okay? All right? So give me a number for the rent per gross square foot. Well, we had sort of did that up here, 5250. So just use that. What the heck? Okay. Loss factor we want to use?
20%?
20%, what the heck? Okay, and vacancy rate?
Another 20%?
Yeah, it's just something different.
Okay, 15%.
15%, okay. All right, you do the calculation. My advice would be to do what's in parentheses by themselves first, just to kind of make sure that you're okay. So for this first piece, that right there is going to be what? 1.25. You're going to take basically 1 minus 0.2, which is going to be 0.8, and then 1 divided by 0.8 is going to give you 1.25. Okay? It's going to be like a multiplier. Okay? Over here,
1.18.
1 minus 0.15 is going to give you 0.85. And then you're going to take 1 divided by 0.85, which is going to give you 1.17647. Just, I don't know how much you want to round. Okay. Then you're going to multiply those two together. Okay, so those two together, then it's going to give you the total multiplier of 1470588. Then you're going to multiply that by the 5250. And you're going to end up with $77 and basically 21 cents rounded for the replacement rent per leased square foot. Now let's just think about what this is. This is looking at it as a gross square footage dollar amount, okay? But this is, in essence, obviously, it is on a gross square footage, so we've got to convert it to a net. So do the conversion for the net. That is the reason for this piece of the calculation, okay? To get net square footage, to take into account the loss factor. Then, to take into account the vacancy rate associated with it, then we've got to do this piece of the calculation. So ultimately, that would mean then the 7721 is going to be, in this case, the lease square feet, or in essence, the total net rent on the net square footage, or the gross rent on the net square footage. Okay? Make sense? Okay. All right. Wasn't that fun? You see why I started with the other stuff first? Okay. Now, okay, the last little piece, question 10, is sort of development hard cost budget summary. All right, so let's just say we've got 4 primary components to a project cost. All right, we've got, let's say, land acquisition. We have total hard cost. We'll talk about that. We've got total soft cost. And also, we're going to sort of have another, basically, construction interest cost. Okay. So all of those combined total up to be 100% of basically total project cost. Okay? Now, if you take a look at your book, specifically, if you look on page 188, and you don't have to, I mean, I'm just going to sort of show you what in essence they did. They take a look at what your total costs are and they look at it on a percentage basis, all right? And so I'm just going to use kind of the percentages that they've got here roughly. So land acquisition, they're saying that this particular project example that they gave, that represents 7.76% of the overall project cost. They're saying that the hard costs are going to represent 63.8. Eyesight. Yeah, 63.88 actually. And then the soft cost, 24.11%, and then the construction interest, 4.26%. Okay, so those are the percentages that they've got for each of those categories. Now, in their case of what they're sort of classifying as hard cost, they're saying that's going to include rezoning cost, it's going to include construction cost, and then any sort of a reserve for contingency in the sense of something goes wrong, unexpected, you know, sort of cost, that's going to be sort of thrown in there as part of the hard cost. Now on the land acquisition side, you know, this is, once again, they don't really break out, you know, in detail, but it's going to be whatever it costs you to buy the land and in essence get it ready for construction, okay? All right, now the soft cost, they've got probably 15 different things here listed as soft cost. So architecture, engineering, permits, utility fees, owner allowances, construction loan fees, lending inspections, transfer, recording fees, real estate taxes, consultants, insurance, marketing, furnishings, legal fees, and development overhead. So all of that stuff gets crammed into what they refer to as a soft cost. So I hope that you can kind of see the difference between the two. Hard costs are just simply, it's sort of talking about the actual building cost, the real, bricks and sticks piece of the construction. Whereas the soft costs are really all of those services and other things, non-material sort of related cost. Now the hard cost is going to include the labor associated obviously with the construction, but this is all the other ancillary sort of overhead and everything else. And then the construction interest on whatever loan that you get, obviously over the course of the construction period, what percentage of the project that you're actually going to be associated with. Yeah. What I am, wanting you to sort of, I don't know, just a simple thing. Let's just say, okay, give me an overall total project cost, dollar amount.
86 million.
Okay, 86 million. What the heck?
Class A.
Hello.
Tired of playing small here.
Okay. All right. So, if I told you that, okay, the overall project, well, actually, let me do it a different way. Actually, let me back up here. I'm going to do it a different way to make it simple. So let's just say that we've got land acquisition. And land acquisition cost, we want to keep it at 7.76. So give me the cost of the land for a project. I want to work it a little bit differently on purpose.
7 million.
Okay, 7 million, 6 million, or 7, 5 million, 7 million, 7 million.
6.5.
So let's just say 6.5 million. What the heck? Okay, so this is what I wanted to do. All right. So if you buy the land, and we assume that within reason, we can kind of keep these percentages somewhat the same, okay? Realizing they're going to be different for each project a little bit, maybe a lot depending on the circumstances. But let's say that we do keep this kind of as a rough sort of estimate of what those costs might be. Well, what does that mean then that our overall total project cost would be? We would do what? Take 6.5 million and do what? Divide it by 7.76 to get the overall project cost, yes? Okay, so let's do that. We're going to have to do this on a quiz, so you might want to do it, okay? All right? So 6.5 million divided by 0.0776 would mean the overall project cost.
83,762.
Oh, we got close to 86.
What are we dividing?
7.7.
Okay, we're taking 6.5 million, dividing it by 0.0776, and that's going to give you the overall amount of the 83 million. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, just simple math. All right.
You could do that with any of them, right?
Yes. Well, assuming you know what the dollar amount is, you have to know one of them. Okay, to be able to do the other. So in this case, now, so you're kind of figuring out what my quiz question might be.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Now
so,
you're going back in.
So basically now, if you've got this,
63%.
then we can say basically take 83, 762, 886, 60 times 0.6388, 53,507,731, 96.
Is that capitalization in any way?
What? I'm sorry?
Is that capitalization in any way?
Okay.
I don't know exactly if, because you're essentially using the cap rate, like an ERG model here. Right?
Well, no, well, not in this case. You're not really using an ERG model. This is really more of just simply saying what are the percentage costs for each of these major components associated with the development project, and assuming those remain relatively static across projects. I mean, they're not going to be, like in reality, what you might find is that your land acquisition cost maybe could go from 5% to 10%. Your total hard cost might go from 55 to 65%. Your soft cost could go maybe from 20 to 30%. And your construction interest cost might go from 0 to 10%, depending on whether you actually borrow the money or not. You follow what I'm saying? Okay, so it's just really just to kind of get a ballpark of, well, what would the component pieces be to see if you're even in the ballpark. All right, so going back to find the others, okay, so 83, 762, 886, 60 times 0.2411. So 20 million, 195, 231, 96. And then finally, 83, 762, 886, 60 times 0.0426, 3,568,298.97. Okay? Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes or no? Now the value, as I said, of that is if you have kind of a rough ballpark of what standard hard costs are, standard soft cost as a percentage of the overall total, you know, and you can sort of back into, then, you know, in essence, this becomes, you know, once again, kind of a back of the envelope kind of transaction of saying, all right, if I buy a piece of land and I pay $6.5 million for it, and that normally is going to represent somewhere in this vicinity of a percentage of the acquisition cost, then that means my whole overall project is going to be maybe an $83 million project. Okay, but you know, you could also sort of, you know, sort of say, well, then another way to look at it would be, all right, if I'm paying that much for land, but the most that I can build on the property is maybe a $50 million project because of height constraints and, you know, sort of land constraints in terms of just sheer size, it's probably not going to make sense for me to spend that much on land. Just another way of kind of getting at sort of a rough sort of feasibility, you know, estimate. Because, you know, a lot of people, you know, when you're doing feasibility, you've also got to take into consideration that, like, I mean, how many times have you driven down the street and, you know, you see some crappy whatever property sitting on a piece of land that you're like, wow, that could be such an amazing project, but yet there's that crappy shopping center or whatever that's on that property, and maybe that crappy shopping center is generating a lot of revenue for the owner of that property they never really want to sell, and they, in their minds, it's worth so much more to them than you know, what they think that they could maybe, you know, sell it for. But at the same time, they may not have really gone through, you know, themselves, you know, the calculation of, well, you know, how much is this really, you know, if I were to sell it off, how much could I really get for it because of the inherent value of what could actually be built on this property? In other words, like there are properties easily in downtown Fort Lauderdale where, like, the one that just pops in my head is, like, it's a shopping center on the corner of Broward and US 1. Okay, you know, and it's only one talk about it. It has like a surrounded by. Yeah, it's like a little L shopping center. Yeah, and the thing is, it actually has the development rights to be able to build a, you know, obviously large skyscraper-esque building, but yet for whatever reason, it's still operating as, you know, just a simple basic shopping center. You know, now the question is, and I don't know the details, you know, in terms of the owner, I don't know, you know, what the constraints are with respect to that, but you would think that that owner would sort of say, hey, I could potentially sell this and, you know, turn a very nice profit on the sale of the land. I mean, granted, you got to tear down the buildings and so forth, you know, and that may be the real constraint there, is that whoever's buying it may not really be willing to pay the price for the properties as is because the owner's getting so much cash flow off of it.
And it's going to carry a premium. He knows what he's setting on.
Yeah, in some cases, yes. But it's a question of how long does it sit there before eventually it does transition, you know, and what is that point of inflection that's going to be dictated by, you know, how big of a project can you actually build on it. Because here's another you know, interesting thing to think about is, you know, kind of from a regulatory point of view. Let's say that property or another property that maybe your current restriction is you can build a 20-story building, okay, just hypothetically. But all of a sudden, just overnight, the city council decides to make some land use changes to their comprehensive plan, and they say, okay, what you could have built a 20-story building, now we're going to allow you to build a 40-story building. How much has that land gone up in value as a result of just that simple zoning change?
A lot. From an FAR density standpoint.
Right. So, you know, that's the sort of thing that, you know, a lot of unsophisticated players aren't really paying attention to that stuff, but the more sophisticated players are looking at, you know, simple little zoning changes like that, you know, obviously inflating the value dramatically on a property.
We call that warehousing up north, where a person will hold some real ugly looking stuff. You see it falling down, you know. And then they know that 10 years from now they're going to put a highway through there or something, so they can, you know, so they will hold it and just take the rents out of it.
Yep.
Don't care if it falls down, don't care if tenants take them to court.
Yeah, because ultimately it's going to be worth something more. Yep. Okay? All right. Any questions on any of this up to this point? Okay. All right. So let's go back. Okay, so now we're good with the quiz. Yes?
No quiz.
We're going to have a quiz, but I'm not going to give you the quiz and for a little while because I've got some other things I want to talk about. But we're done with the quiz material. Okay. Because you don't need an hour and a half for the quiz, trust me. And I want to teach some other
Well,
stuff.
have an hour for the rest of it too, for the last question.
Okay. So, let's go back to the first piece of what we covered today. All right. And let's look at something. I want to take this and expand on it a little bit. I'm not saying you won't see this on a future quiz. I'm saying on today's quiz you will not see this. Okay? All right. So, on the financial feasibility model, one of the things and one of the questions that, you know, folks sort of ask, well, you know, this model does not take into account what's really happening with your equity in the project. Okay, this is only sort of taking into account, you know, your debt. Okay, in terms of your cost of debt with your interest rate and that sort of thing. So, what's actually happening with your equity? Let's just sort of take a look here, just for a second. So, we in essence have a $20 million construction or development cost. We're financing 70% of that for $14 million as our permanent mortgage. Well, that means that obviously the difference between those two is what? $6 million. What does that $6 million represent?
Equity.
Equity. Okay? So what is actually happening to that equity in terms of what sort of rate of return are we potentially getting on that equity? And how do we go about sort of calculating that? So I want you to think about this for a second. Okay? Actually, this will be fun. Work with your neighbor, figure out with this particular scenario, what would be sort of your return on equity. Okay, everybody understand what I'm asking? In other words, you've got $6 million equity investment. Under this scenario, what would be your actual return on equity, basically your before tax return on equity? Okay, so your before tax return on equity is basically your before tax cash flow divided by your equity. Okay, you're welcome to work with somebody else on this. Like I said, you're probably going to see this on the future quiz, so don't just ignore this and don't just like say, I'm not going to mess with this.
Divided by.
This is to see if you know what you're doing, which you may or may not. If I write over here, can you see that? Okay. Thank you, Ken. Wait, where I'm standing. Oh. Okay. So we have $6 million in equity. Okay, we all agree on that, yes? Okay, now, what else do we know in this? We know our net operating income and we know our annual debt service, yes?
Right.
Okay, So if you remember, on sort of, just regular sort of cash flow, we have PGI minus vacancy and collection losses plus other income gives us effective gross income minus total operating expenses gives us NOI minus annual debt service gives us before tax cash flow. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so what do we know? Net operating income is what? Okay, read me the number.
1842,983.31.
Okay, and this one we'll round off just to the dollar. Okay, annual debt service. What's the dollar amount?
1417,679.46.
Okay, 14 what?
1417. 679.
679. Okay.
0.47.
All right. Now, that's going to give us before tax cash flow of $425,304. Okay. Now, assuming that number, stays constant, doesn't necessarily have to, but at least for this portion of the analysis or this type of analysis, what would we do to get what I was asking for, which is your before tax return on equity, which is equal to your before tax cash flow divided by your equity. We now have the variables that we need. Okay. The before tax cash flow, the $425,304, our equity, $6 million. Okay. Now this is just simply looking at a raw calculation. This is not about discounting, future income. This is just simply a simple, quick rate of return based upon this first year's cash flow. Okay. So 425,304 divided by 6 million. And we end up with basically 7.09% rounded. Everybody get that? Okay. So now this begins to be kind of another interesting question. That's our return on equity, 7.09%. Now, do you think that's a substantial enough return for us to do this?
Nope.
No, probably not. That's a pretty low return on equity. So this is kind of like part 2 of the feasibility analysis piece. The project is feasible. Okay, we're able to pay our bills. We're able to take care of giving the lender what they desire. But now comes the piece of, are we getting what we desire in terms of a return on our equity that is substantial enough for us to be happy? No, we are not. Chances are we might set a threshold of 15% for, if we set our threshold at 15% for a before tax return on equity, then what does that mean that our before tax cash flow would need to be? Okay, so you take 6 million, okay, times 0.15. That means that our before tax cash flow would have to basically more than double to around 900,000, okay, in order for this deal to make sense. Okay, so then what we would potentially have to do is to go into our model and in essence, try to see what it would take to get us there, in essence of, going at and saying, okay, well, how much would we have to potentially raise our rent to or lower our operating expenses? Because here, these are all, in other words, what we're trying to do, just another way to look at this, 900,000 is what we're trying to achieve over here before tax cash flow. Okay, so working back up the page, if we're able to keep, our annual debt service at $1,025,000 417,679, okay, then that means our net operating income, just working backwards, we would need 2,317,679 as our net operating income. Okay, is everybody with me? And we would literally just keep working backwards until we get back to the PGI and then say, okay, well, what does that mean the rent would have to be in order to effectively accomplish this? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's just do that real quick. We got plenty of time.
So you can also try to lower your operating expenses too.
Yes, you could. Okay, all right. All right, so what were our operating expenses on this transaction? 500,000. So assuming we keep those the same, okay, we don't make the adjustment, but we just keep those the same, keep those constant. All right. Then what does that mean that our effective gross income is going to be? $2,817,679. Okay, because we're working backwards, so we're basically adding those. Okay. Other income, let's say we don't have any. All right. Vacancies and collection losses. In this case, let's just say that we use the dollar amount that we had here. Where is it? Well, we actually used occupancy rate, so we can do it like that. That's fine. We use 90%. So basically what you can do is take this number, divide it by 90% to get the overall. So PGI is going to be 31,30,754, 44, and the difference between those two of 300 and basically 13,075.44 is going to be your vacancy and collection loss. Okay, but now this number is really what we've been sort of looking for. So 3.13 million. All right, how many square feet do we have on this property?
100,000.
Was it? I can't remember this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, 100,000. Okay.
So 31.
Okay. So basically take that, divide it by 100,000.
30.
Okay.
31.3.
Yep. So basically you would need to have $31.31 of rent per square foot per year, as opposed to what we were saying here, $26.03. Okay? Now, once again, this gets back question of feasibility. Okay? If market rents are 30 bucks a square foot.
How much? 30?
30. Market rent is 30.
It's not a go.
Okay, well, it's a go just based on the financial feasibility with respect to covering our cost, paying our lender what they require. It is feasible at 30 bucks a square foot. Or, I'm sorry, $30 per square foot. But to be able to achieve what we want in terms of a 15% basically before tax return on equity, it's not feasible. You follow? Because we would need to be charging $31.31 per square foot to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of our rate of return. So it would need to, so in other words, in order for it to be feasible to us as equity investors, we would need something north or higher than $31.31 per square foot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, but I have two questions.
Okay.
So NOI equals, NPV equals 0 at 26. Because in essence, you're just keeping the engine going.
Well, it's not that NPV is zero. This is just simply saying you are covering your debt cost. You are covering, your operating cost, and meeting the ratio requirements of your lender by virtue of the debt service coverage ratio and the loan to value ratio. All of those things in tandem are saying that the feasibility is okay with a rent rate in the market above this amount. But what we're saying is, with that set of constraints, that's only going to give us a 7% return on the money we are personally investing as an equity player. What we're saying is 7% is not enough. We want more. We want 15%. So what do we have to do in rent rates to be able to achieve that 15%? That's where we work backwards to then get to, okay, this is the dollar amount we would need to have in order to be able to say, all right, we have met the criteria of our lender, and we have met the criteria of our investors. So that is the amount that we need to achieve or higher.
So it would be less than 1 because your NPV is set off what you want to make, right?
Well, in this case, we're sort of saying, yes, this is in essence our hurdle rate of 15%.
And then that would set the NPV at 0.
In essence, yes. But this is also not a discounted cash flow. This is simply a 1-year sort of analysis.
And then you can find the difference.
This is also why, okay, I just want to make sure I throw in all the caveats. This is why this is called and labeled as such simple financial feasibility analysis, because we're not taking into consideration all of these other variables, because it also doesn't take into consideration taxes, doesn't take into consideration, payments, distributions to different partners and when they're going to be paid, how much they're going to have paid, under what conditions. We're going to be doing that. That's the reason why I'm going over this now, is because one of the next pieces of what we're going to be sort of looking at is how do we kind of get back to this number, but also how do we take into consideration many of these other factors.
But in theory, what you could do, instead of trying to raise rents, you could just find the difference based on square foot and then add square footage, right? Like the convert.
Well, assuming you can, but assuming it's a fixed building, you can't.
Yeah, okay.
Or
if it's possible to raise rents,
right.
then
but also, like Adam pointed out, assuming you could push off some of these operating expenses onto the tenant,
that's true.
Then that would be another way that you potentially could, get closer to your number.
But in his scenario, with adding more, wouldn't that just increase costs?
Yes, it'll increase your construction cost.
Well, I mean, like if you have a room that's not being used or something, like mixed unit, this guy that bought like a marina and then he turned like a non-use room into a cigar lounge, and then he charges rent, and he makes in a while it shot up. You know what I mean? So then your rent, you can make more than that potentially.
Yes. Yeah. They're perfect case in point. And I know I've probably told this story before, but like some of the buildings that I bought, in Texas, in many cases, they were 2-story buildings, and in many instances, the buildings were being valued only on their first floor proposition, not on the second floor at all. And the reason for that was they were sort of saying, well, if it's a commercial building, then it's got to have an elevator. Well, and these buildings didn't have elevators, so it limited what use you could put on the second floor, but you could put residential on the second floor, but none of them were choosing to do that. They were all just not imagining that the residential would even be an option. They were thinking strictly commercial.
Did they have anything on the second floor?
No, there was wide open spaces in virtually every one of the buildings, and so all of a sudden I'm just like, okay, why is no one else doing this,
In a real life scenario where your numbers are supposed 30 versus 31, in addition to all what was said, can we throw in something like some tenant incentives?
Yeah, I mean, there are many other things that we could, obviously use to adjust this. you know, in terms of, yeah, upfront free rent or, you know, tenant improvements or whatever that, you know, may also get us there. But also another way of sort of looking at this is, you know, even part of the lessons, if you sort of, you know, think about it, that this, you know, as Adam was saying about pushing more of the operating expenses, you know, potentially over to the tenant, relieving you of that responsibility, then all of a sudden the rent that you're quoting is a rent that basically, you know, could include operating expenses for the tenant or not. And that could inflate or deflate, you know, what the actual quoted rent rate is. Okay, so there's a lot of different things you could do to this. But part of what you should be doing is being able to kind of work it all the way down, but then kind of say, okay, well, let's replace one variable or multiple variables, and then how does that impact everything else to see whether or not it makes it more feasible, less feasible, or, you know, whatever it ultimately does to it. Okay.
What I was going to say is that being that in the first scenario, the $26 one,
yep,
it's just keeping your pipeline filled, your construction capacity filled. It's a go, and I know if you hold it, it's just going to increase the cost overall because you have added fees of holding costs and whatnot. It was basically the same scenario, though.
Mm-hmm. What we've got to do to basically expand this, which we're going to do, we're not going to do it today, but what we're going to do is basically and specifically, whoops, I thought that had it right. Okay, try again. No, okay, I thought I had the other one pulled up. But basically what you're gonna do is simply add in a full actual multi-year cash flow, okay? So that you would see not just a snapshot of basically 1 year, but ultimately, let's say like a 5-year cash flow with all of the other things embedded in it with respect to income taxes, partner distributions, that sort of thing. And that's the end goal of what we're trying to get at, okay? All right, make sense? All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the quizzy. One announcement that I wanna make before the quiz. So, this is obviously quiz number 4. Okay, now if you remember back to the first day of class, what did I say? That basically after you take the quiz today, if you are happy with your basically first 4 quiz grades, then I just see you next week and you take quiz number 5 and we continue on in our process. But if for whatever reason you're not happy with your average on the first 4 quizzes, then you have the option today, after you get your quiz grade back, of telling me, I am not happy with my quiz grades, therefore I want to schedule a midterm sometime this next week between basically Monday and Friday, in other words, before class next week, and basically take the same content that we took on the first 4 quizzes as a closed book, closed note, closed computer exam that will replace your quiz grades. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, but I need to know today, and we need to set the appointment, if at all possible, today. Okay? Okay, are we good with that? All right, so let's do the quiz. And just so you know, on the quiz itself, on the back of the quiz, is the financial feasibility analysis model so that you can use that to fill in using the information given on the quiz.